discern the environment that they're in for their workplaces, and how they have to understand the context of how they're thinking. You mentioned, I think, 4, or is there 5 ways of viewing faith? 5. You mentioned 5. Do you remember what all those are?
Let's see if you're testing if I can remember what I wrote, which oftentimes I cannot. But that's from a friend, and his scholar's name is David Miller, but he talks about these 4 postures toward faith in the workplace. And this tends to be how sort of corporations or businesses or larger institutions tend to see faith and how they treat faith in the workplace. So he had these 4 paradigms. One was faith avoidant, that we're totally going to avoid faith and it's inappropriate for the workplace and you shouldn't talk about it here. Mm-hmm. 2 was faith tolerant, like, fine, you can do that. We'll make some sort of accommodations for you in this context for you to do your religious thing, right? The 3rd is faith-based, and this would probably be the most common, I think, thoughts in terms of how we think about faith in the workplace, but contexts that are through and through imbued with their founders' values. So this could be the Chick-fil-A sort of in our world, but it could be, Mackie at Whole Foods and the Buddhist faith. Like, it's very much kind of put through a system right there. So very faith-based. And then he also talks about faith-friendly environments that very much invite other people's faiths and kind of core convictions to the table. And then I added a 5th one. There are some contexts globally, quite a few contexts, that are faith persecuting. You could get killed, right? So I think in a Western context, we need to hear that as well. So what I wrote that is just saying it can be helpful to discern of those 5, which environment are you in, because it influences your missionary encounter, right? If you're in a faith-based context, you probably will want to, like, say a small dentist office and everybody's a Christian, and you hire one person that's not, you really want to make sure that that person feels the openness to talk about their core convictions and doesn't feel pushed out. In other contexts of maybe faith avoiding, you may be really called to be courageous public witness that may be very costly to you, right? Now, do it with wisdom, do it with gentleness and respect, but do it to be very boldly as a witness to Jesus. That may be that context for you, right? And there are other contexts where there'd be faith persecuting that you have to rethink, how do we do a missionary encounter in this context? And so that, it may be martyrdom, but there may be other ways to think about the Christian mission in very difficult contexts. So I do think being thoughtful about the context you're in, and then the rest of that chapter, I talk a little bit about reimagining your workplace culture in light of the gospel, as well as thinking about the language that you use. I don't mean like curse words or not. I mean, like, I have a buddy who worked at a large private equity firm. So private equity, they buy and sell companies. And he told me that their de facto values were greed, money, and more greed. Though they of course didn't say that, but that was the de facto values. But right up on the board in his office, he had 5 values. He had excellence, integrity, grace, humility, and love. So he didn't say necessarily, people knew that he was a believer, right? But that was what he led with in that context, because he realized that it's a very not faith-friendly context whatsoever. But he says, how do I do this? Well, I first start with values, and then I have the conversations, and then I get to where I'm coming from, and people get to know me. And he was an incredible witness he did lots of missionary encounters with a lot of powerful people in his context. And that could be lots of contexts. You may be in a very not faith-friendly context, but I do think that first discerning and then thinking about what is the distinctiveness that then leads to the gospel can be important.